is August 25th, 2021. My name is Lori Kurtz. My pronouns are she, hers. Would you please introduce yourself? Tell us your pronouns if you care to, and tell us all the things you do.
Hi there. My name is Betty Gaker. My stage name is Dame Peaches von Killingsworth. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am a burlesque performer, producer of my own small little troupe, and a vocalist for various musical projects in Oregon.
What is burlesque?
I suppose that is sort of a subjective question, but burlesque by my definition, would be a, a performance art that is built around human sexuality and absurdism and humor and the avant-garde. Um, but overall, the art of tease also. So we're using the art of tease to sort of tell our story as burlesque dancers and performers.
And how do you describe the kind of burlesque that you do?
The kind of burlesque that I do generally is rather avant-garde. Um, I don't consider myself a classic performer, although my style has sort of evolved and changed over the years, accordingly, just as I gain more experience and learn more about the art form.
Yeah, so explain what classic burlesque is.
I suppose the way that I would explain it is a specific um, set of movements and costume styles that have more to do with tradition. Um, and then, as opposed to like what I do, I usually don't use traditional costuming as much as I use costuming for like a performance art piece. Um, Generally, when I see classic performers or neoclassic performers, it's very, very different from what I do. It's very, it's like there's a formula to it almost, whereas that's not really how I choreograph my pieces specifically.
And what would be examples of traditional costume pieces?
Oh, I suppose like the corset and that's and rhinestoning and cage panties and um, gloves, the long gloves, and uh, I mean, I think lots of burlesque performers base their ideas off of the classic image, but kind of make it their own identity through their own experience and their own creative process.
Yeah. And so, what kind of avant garde costuming do you do then?
Well, I'm not very educated in sewing. I can crudely sew. So what I tend to do with costuming is find a base that I find to be rather unique or can be used as a burlesque piece. There's a few components that make that what I would consider usable, and the major one is you have to be able to get it off. um, so I'll usually purchase a piece and then build off of it, whether that be with rhinestoning or sewing something on it or creating a prop that goes with it. But I am not a fashion designer. I tend to use a lot of very dark colors. My acts are on the more dark side, so they're a little bit different than a lot of people's.
Ah, yeah. And so, why do you do burlesque of all the different creative art forms? What does it give you?
Well, I was trained in dance for the majority of my childhood. I I was classically trained in Russian ballet from about 3 to about 17. Um, And then I quit to predominantly focus on music, which was kind of just my entire career after that. And I I remember the feeling of being on stage and always really, really missing that and wanting that in a performance art aspect. And burlesque to me kind of gave me that opportunity without the rigidity of classic ballet and another opportunity to also convey my background in visual art. Um, so I consider music my first love of my life, and then burlesque my second. And I never really want to live without one or the other. So
So where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Kalispell, Montana. I grew up a little outside Kalispell in a town called Big Fork. It's right on the Flathead Lake, and my mother lived in Kalispell in town, and then my dad lived out in the country on the lake. It's a gorgeous place to grow up. Unfortunately, it's also very conservative and not as progressive as Oregon. So I do love where I live now for that reason.
Yeah. And what brought you to Oregon then?
My ex-husband brought me to Oregon. Him and I were in a music duo together, and he had a son who lived here. So we wanted to be closer. We also wanted to continue pursuing our music in a larger city, um, but didn't really want to live in Portland. So we ended up in Eugene, and I've been here for 10 or 11 years now, and I love it.
That's great. You've already mentioned Russian ballet, but then you said you're a music performer too. So what did you do in your formative years with those aspects of performance?
So I started as a singer-songwriter with just vocals and guitar. And then when I met my ex-husband, he played banjo and mandolin and was kind of the multi-instrumentalist. And we had quite a bit of success performing in Montana, so we moved to Oregon to pursue it here, and then started a band here called Betty and the Boy. We toured internationally and all over the country really, and then broke up. And at the time, I was kind of dabbling in also doing vocals for electronic music projects. So that was kind of the beginning of when I shifted gears from being predominantly a folk singer to a more versatile vocalist. Um, and then I continued doing folk music for a bit, like on the side. Once Betty and the Boy kind of was laid to rest, I continued with some of my bandmates as Baroque Betty. We produced an album that we released last year, and now we're on an indefinite hiatus. So, but
Because of the pandemic.
because of the pandemic and also just growing separate ways creatively for the most part. Yeah, my bandmates were quite a bit older than me and are generally kind of settling down in life, and I'm kind of still in the realm of pursuing music professionally. Um, so I'm moving and grooving still, still in my 30s, like ready to take it up full force. So.
You mentioned traveling internationally to perform.
What was the question?
Where did you travel internationally to perform?
Oh, sure, yeah. So Betty and the Boy did a tour in the UK, I think in 2015. Um, I honestly don't remember a lot about that because I was in the midst of my divorce. And then we did a performance on a cruise to the Bahamas once. It was a bluegrass cruise, and we were competing in a band contest. It was all very wild. um, But yeah, some good fun memories with that project.
Great. And so what formal training or education, college or other, do you have, if any?
I don't have any formal training in music or dance necessarily. I do have a degree that I got from the U of O in humanities, which is very, very broad. But my focus was gender studies. Um, so that's where my education is kind of around.
Yeah. Did you have any workshops or trainings with in the realm of burlesque? People go to BurlyCon or they join a troupe and take classes that way.
Nope.
It's all you.
Yep. I walked into an audition and believe it or not.
Yep. And so when was that? In what year and how did you get started in burlesque?
I believe it was 2016, and as the story goes, I had just left my ex-husband. He was a very abusive individual, and so I don't remember a lot of how I got from point A to point B. I was homeless for about a year and a half, and um, I had basically one costume in my car, and a friend who was performing with this burlesque troupe here in town. And I just happened to ask, like, how did you get involved in that? And how could I potentially get involved in that? And she said to email this email, and eventually I had a scheduled audition, and I walked into the audition, did it. Apparently, the troupe thought I looked too polished, so I had to do a series of different auditions. One of them was in front of a live audience, and then was accepted into the troupe after those performances. Um, but really, I had no background or knowledge of how or what to do. I always knew I wanted to, but I just wasn't allowed to in the relationship that I was in. Um, and and I'm so grateful that I did, because it became a huge chosen family that I love and adore.
Yeah. And so your stage name is Dame Peaches von Killingsworth.
Mm-hmm.
How did you pick that name?
I didn't pick it. So the night of my audition, I didn't have a name even. And I go by Betty. I was like, can't I just use Betty? And they said, no, you can't just use Betty. So the host that evening, whose name was Bayou Betty, uh, put some slips of paper in a hat and passed it to the audience and told them, write some names on these slips, and at the end we're going to pull them out and pick her name. And it ended up being Dame Peaches von Killingsworth, and that's been my name forever, and I've kept it since. It means a lot to me. Considered changing it, but then I just can't, because after that I was Peach or Peaches, and that's um, kind of just became my identity.
And then how did you develop your performance career, burlesque performance career beyond that? Did you stick with that troupe? How did you develop that aspect?
So something unique about that troupe was that it was a weekly production. So we had a show every Sunday, and I performed basically every Sunday for like 4 years. And I I can't believe, I don't know how I did it, but I very, very quickly established an identity that way, and learned very, very quickly what works and what doesn't, and the odds and ends about production, and just fell in love with it. Um, and and that was the Broadway Review. Yeah, there. That's that's where I can pay all my homage to.
Yeah. Aren't they one of the longest running burlesque shows in Eugene?
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember if it's like for 15 years now or something.
Mhm.
Originally at John Henry's and now our home is Lucky's.
Yeah, that's great. And so outside of performing burlesque, what do you do to support that art? A day job?
I used to have a day job pre-COVID, and that was kind of what I preferred to do for many years. And now, after learning how to live without a job, and learning that it is possible to live off of art to some degree, it's been difficult to gauge with the pandemic kind of ruining everybody's plans. But I've kind of decided to do it full time. But before the pandemic, I worked in a little office. I was an advocate for the OMMP program, which is the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program. Um, and I did that part time and then was off on the weekends performing. Um, and they were very flexible with my performance schedule. But unfortunately, they went out of business when the pandemic hit. So there's that.
Yeah, there's that. Before, as you mentioned, before March 2020, when the pandemic shut down Oregon, what was the burlesque community like in the Eugene Corvallis area?
I don't know much about the Corvallis area, but I do know that Eugene was thriving with burlesque. You could basically go to a show any given weekend between the Broadway Review, Unveiled Queer Burlesque, Scrumptious Scoundrels. There's usually a regular, at least monthly show at Sam Bonds, and we had a pretty wide community of people to kind of contribute to all of those shows between all of us. And then during the pandemic, a lot of people had to move away. Um, a lot of productions just kind of crumbled, venues crumbled. So now it looks a little bit different. It's a little bit more constricted between performers that are still wanting to do this. Something I've noticed through the pandemic is many people realize they don't want to do the hustle anymore of doing shows and rehearsals and things like that. They're moving on to different things. But but there's still something. We're still kind of trying to revive what we had, and yeah.
Right. And so earlier you mentioned you're a producer, and that wax poetry.
The Wax Poetry Review.
Yeah, how did that come about? And tell us about that.
Um, so while I was with the Broadway Review, it seemed to me that there was kind of a slight division in the way that people stylistically performed. And I developed some really tight knit relationships with people who were on the more avant garde side of the burlesque performances. And kind of decided with the Wax Poetry Review, originally what I really wanted was for it to be a multimedia um, troupe of people to put on shows with greater intent for themes and stories and things like that. But that was a little bit, those shoes were a little bit big for me to fill at that time. I'm still really learning the ins and outs of producing, which is actually incredibly difficult. And so I've kept it pretty secluded to burlesque for now, just to keep learning and figuring out how production works. And and part of that is basically to keep people safe and paid and respected. So the Wax Poetry Review at this point is predominantly burlesque for now. Hopefully, in the future, we can branch out and include different forms of art into our productions, but it's burlesque for now.
Yeah, yeah. And so speaking of the pandemic, and you mentioned earlier that you did a week, 4 years. How has the pandemic affected your creativity or ability to create?
Um, you know, the pandemic, in a way, really put me back into a feeling of survival mode. And I don't feel particularly creative when I am trying to survive. It's like a switch goes off to focus on taking care of myself. And there were moments like within the pandemic that things started to feel better or feel worse. And the times that stress was sort of relieving, and I would get like a show here, a show there, a little thing to look forward to. I would have these bursts of creativity, to do costuming or some choreography, but in general, I was very uninspired by this whole situation. And um, I think one of the things that I really try to force myself to do when I'm not feeling creative through this is trying to do rhinestoning. It's actually very meditative, like for my brain to do tedious hand tasks. So I have been making things very sparkly these days, but overall, like this has just been a very challenging experience to stay creative, and it's been tough.
And so we had a little bit of a break when the masks came off, and we had about 5 or 6 weeks of maybe we're going to come out of this. That I'm talking about, mid-May to June, and then the Delta variant reared its head and started sweeping through. Have
Mhm.
you been performing currently here in the summer of 2021?
Yes, I perform with a group called High Step Society as their vocalist, and starting about May-ish, we started traveling out of state to do some performances. Um, all of July, we were out touring. We did a national tour for the whole month and some change. And then basically, at the minute we arrived to Oregon, things started hitting the fan again. And this month has been really challenging, watching all of our work disappear again. But we got a couple of months there that we had a job, and hopefully things will pick up again. I'm concerned, but still keeping some optimism as we don't get shut down. Um, but yeah, it's very up and down right now.
So shifting to sort of more social justice issues, the topic of cultural appropriation. What
Mhm.
are your considerations when putting together a routine, or what's the conversation in the burlesque troupe where you perform the most about cultural appropriation?
Um, the way that I feel like I'm a person who's pretty good at thinking critically, and if if there's something that feels like it's not appropriate, I usually stay very far away from it. Even with music selections, and in particular with costuming, if there's any kind of like culture that I'm trying to convey that I am not from or don't know much about, it just doesn't seem right or appropriate or cool. Um, so I guess that's how I gauge it personally.
And then diversity in burlesque in your region of Oregon, Eugene. Uh, how do you, as a producer, you try to introduce diversity into burlesque?
Um, it's that's a difficult thing in this region specifically. We are a very very white part of the country, um, and I feel like trying to produce shows. It's a constant. learning process of how to be more inclusive and how to be more diverse. Um, I guess one of my big rules for myself when trying to cast roles is to prioritize people of color and queer people, queer identifying people, um, and then kind of like overarching over that is my particular style with booking performers is to not consider experience as the criteria to enter them in. What I find to be the most important is that they are creatively driven people, and I could potentially give them a place to flourish that and grow into one of our community members. And um, so I don't fear bringing very new people into our group, and try not to. That's kind of my personal philosophy.
Other people I've interviewed talk about how burlesque can be a force for social change. What's your take on that?
I think that's very true. I know that just from participating in burlesque for as long as I have, it is a very safe, welcoming community. It's a place where I've been able to find family where I normally wasn't able to. Um, there's always people kind of looking out for each other, and I think that is progressive. Um, and especially in such a like because the art form is so vulnerable, we're all being very very vulnerable with each other. We're also all looking out for each other in each other's vulnerability. I believe it is a force of social change. It's also a force of social change in the way that we're um, promoting and supporting outward acts of like our own sexuality and not feeling ashamed about it, making other people who view it not feel ashamed about it because they see us doing it, um, which is one of my favorite parts about it. So,
You've already touched on some of the challenges facing burlesque today, COVID
mhm.
pandemic. Anything else about, some people have mentioned constriction in social media. What challenges do you see facing burlesque?
Well, one of the challenges, obviously, right now is it is such a live art that it we really need audiences in front of us. Like, I know many troops have been able to do virtual shows, but that is just it's really not the soul of this art form, and not having that has kind of flatlined some of our communities. Um, but there's a few other issues that I've noticed. One of them is being, at least in Eugene, is being able to maintain standards of fair pay and compensation. Um, and in recent days, I've met with a couple different producers here in town to talk about how we hold those standards between each production as like a kind of a baseline so that we don't end up like undercutting each other, and people don't get paid or but it's a process, and I hope it's a process that we can look further into post pandemic, just kind of as a fresh start.
Yeah. And then final question, what do you wish the general public would understand about burlesque?
um, that's an interesting question. I um, personally, the burlesque as an art form for me, once I started doing it, I kind of made this agreement to myself that I wasn't going to worry myself with what other people perceived it as, because people can really only perceive a certain thing from their own level of perception. And I guess if I could say I wanted something, even though I don't really care what people think when I do it because it's so important to me, is to know that it is um, an expression of myself that you would never ever see just by sitting in front of me and talking to me or seeing me sing and play music. It's a very, very unique format of who I am. And I think it goes to say the same thing for many other burlesque dancers and performers, that it's truly a very well thought out art form, and it's not just people getting on stage to like get attention or like get naked for no reason. It's a very deep form of expression for many people.
Great. Betty, thank you so very much for this.
Yeah, you're welcome.